This course attempts to provide a historical overview of the main currents or the main approaches to education, but with a focus on education today, new learning, but in the context of how education today and new learning may, in many respects, be different from a number of historical traditions in education. So going back to kind of a foundational space, it begins by characterising what we call didactic pedagogy. Now we know what didactic pedagogy is like in terms of, the conventional lecture theatre or the conventional classroom with a teacher at the front and the content driven by the textbook. So what we do is we characterise that. In fact, go back to some of the original thinkers in this area, like St Benedict, who said it was beholden to the student to listen while the master or the teacher speaks. The Benedictine kind of approach to learning and education. Now, we characterise that, and that's in fact the characteristic form of modern institutionalised education from the time when it's founded, from about the mid-19th century on. Then around the turn of the 20th century, we see the emergence of a type of education which we call authentic pedagogy, often called progressive pedagogy. People like Maria Montessori, John Dewey, who believe that education should be experiential, it should be relevant, it should be grounded in students' lives, that students should be agents in the process and not just passive. And in fact, that tradition is even older than Dewey and Montessori and people like that. It goes back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who had a very liberal idea of what education should be like. All sorts of criticisms of that approach to education, by the way. It's not as if it's an unproblematic one in a whole lot of ways. And on the other hand, going back to didactic education, there are purposes and places, perhaps, for that approach to pedagogy. So we come on to a third paradigm, which we call transformative pedagogy, which is our idea of new learning. So we live in an environment now where there are a lot of things happening in the world around cultural diversity, around technology, but also a world where students are expecting, or young people or learners are expecting much more to be agents in their knowledge making, in control of their knowledge making. So there's a big sort of shift in sensibilities, which is not just around new media and technology and the world that we live in, but it's actually, there are shifts in identity as well, and around shifts around diversity and globalisation. So this is the moment perhaps where the older authentic paradigms and the didactic paradigms don't always work, and we need to think imaginatively about new forms of learning. So it's in this sort of big picture theoretical context that we try and talk about, okay, what is the future of education? What should we be doing with learners and schools going forward in this new environment? But it's one where we don't want to simply abandon these old traditions, the didactic tradition and the authentic tradition. There are elements of those which we may want to strategically use at various times, but there may be new things that we need to do as well that supplement those, and that's what we mean by this view of new learning.